Hey, what is going on, y'all? Welcome back to today's episode. We have got a dynamite one for you with Adam Hayes from Team 200 and the Moon Guide. I'm sure a lot of you guys know Adam. For those of you that don't, man, you're in for a treat on this one. We get into a multitude of awesome topics on how to target some giant bucks and how to hunt them and how to plan your hunts for out of state, what Adam's strategies are for targeting and finding some of these big deer. And I mean, I don't really think there's many people out there that have killed 4 or 5 different 200-inch deer, really, and have been doing it for this long. Adam's been hunting for 45 years now, and he's based in Ohio. And man, the guy's just an absolute killer. Whether it's out west killing elk or whitetails, he's just super consistent. And I couldn't be happier to share his knowledge with y'all on this episode. We get into a multitude of things. Stay tuned. So I've got to say, this is probably one of my favorite episodes for knowledge. There's so much really good nuggets in this one that can anybody, no matter what your skill set is, can apply. So you guys will really be excited for this one. First of all, let's give a huge thanks to our sponsors to make this possible: Lone Wolf Custom Gear, Osseo Gear, Painted Arrow Outdoors, and Timberwolf Supply Company. Guys, I hope you're following each and every one of these companies, and I hope you're staying up to date. And we've got some shows coming out for Osseo, I believe, after the spring. I'll keep you up to date on that. Any updates with Lone Wolf? I believe I just got word today that we're upping the customer service. So if you guys have any questions about any products, you'll be able to reach somebody on a live chat. Just go over to Lone Wolf and check out the details on that. But I believe it'll be from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. Central, Monday through Friday. So that's a really cool announcement. I know a lot of you guys, it's been a concern over the years. Sometimes the customer service has been great. It's been a little bit spotty, but we absolutely was floored to hear that news, and I'm sure you guys are too. So let's get into our quote of the week. And this one I do not have an author for, but I really enjoyed it, and I thought it applied really well to this episode. So hope you guys like it. No one gets remembered for the things that they didn't do. I couldn't agree more with that one, and I hope you guys like that. I wanted to keep this one a little short. If you can't tell by my voice, it's a little hoarse. I'm just getting over a cold. It's been pretty bad this week, and I was really happy that I recorded this one last week. So yeah, with that being said, hope you guys enjoy this one. Let's get into today's episode with Adam Hayes. So what's up, Adam? Pleasure to have you on the podcast, man. Really looking forward to this one.
Absolutely, man. I appreciate you inviting me.
Yeah. We've got a couple topics. Obviously, giant bucks are going to be in discussion today. But there was one thing we kind of got to catch up a little bit there at the Ohio show, and getting to hang out there at the Osseo booth was great. And you're one of the guests I've always wanted to have on here, and I figured what better time to ask you than when we were at the show there. So
sure.
Yeah, I appreciate your time, but I was listening to another podcast that was done from some other guys, and I was really interested to kind of like debunk theirs, because how we do like science versus fiction, or what's actually happening in the woods. Well, they basically had come out and said that the moon phase has nothing to do with deer movement. So I want to get into some of that stuff. But a little overview of yourself, Adam. I'm sure a lot of our listeners know who you are, but maybe for some of those guys that have been living under a rock, can you give us a little overview of yourself and what you got going on lately?
Sure. So this will be my 45th year bow hunting. So I've been at it a while. It's probably, pushing 24, 25 years that I've been in the archery industry, producing TV shows for different manufacturers. And then I started my own show, Team 200, which we're in the 13th season of that. So I've been in the industry, different different uh, different shows, different manufacturers for a while. Um, as far as the Moon Guide goes, I purchased the Moon Guide. We were just talking about, I think back in 2017. So it's been 8 years, something like that. But I've used the product for 30 years. I first started using it in the late 90s, when I was introduced to Jeff Murray, who actually invented it back in the 90s. And he kind of mentored me and took me under his wing and kind of, you know, showed me what was up with the Moon Guide and how it worked and why it worked. And I actually killed my first 200-inch deer that first year. So
Really?
I,
Oh
I
man.
was I was sold after that, and I've done a lot of hunting, a lot of trial and error with my personal system that I use when it comes to hunting big deer, and paying attention to the moon, the weather, the wind, all those different things. But I feel like over the last 20 years, I've really kind of honed my strategy, whether it's hunting here at home or traveling. I normally hunt 4 or 5 states every year, get up to Canada whenever I can. But yeah, that's kind of it in a nutshell. I don't know if I skipped anything that you're interested in, but
No, I mean, I think anybody, I'm going to try to get the picture for this episode of you with a lot of your bucks on the, I guess on the barn there. Anybody that sees the picture, I mean, it's kind of self-explanatory how many giant bucks that you've taken in your life, and I would consider you one of the best whitetail hunters in the country.
thank you.
Um, yeah, no, it's an honor to have you on here, man. Really, and I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
So to kind of touch in and touch on the moon phase and the moon guide for that matter, I know at a young age it's really cool for me because my dad always had it. I remember being even a teenager, and my dad every year would purchase the moon guide, and he swore by it, and I was like, at the time I never really paid that much attention to it, but as I've grown older, I'm like, man, I think I've been using your moon guide for heck, at least the past 7 years or more. And it's been great, and I've definitely noticed a huge difference in the red moon, like as far as the deer movement goes, and seeing a lot more mature deer during those red moon days.
Right. Yeah.
So it really bothered me, like when I heard this study and they were like, they did a study on all these collared deer. For those of you guys that may not have heard this, but they basically did it. It was Mississippi State University, their deer biologist, did this study on collared deer in the South, and basically kind of came to the conclusion that the moon didn't play any part in having a deer move extra in that day. And I couldn't help but like kind of call bluff on it. And I was really excited to kind of challenge it with you. And I don't want to make the whole podcast about that, but in your experience, like, from traveling and hunting all these states, I mean, do you have you noticed a huge difference in the past when you would just, numbers hunt versus selectively hunting on these red moon days? I mean, when was like the light bulb moment for you that you noticed there was definitely something that was there?
Well, like I said, I think, the first year I started using it, was the light bulb moment for me. And Jeff had a hard time convincing me to be patient enough to stay out of my area until everything lined up. And I tell guys a lot of the time, when they're asked the same question, that the toughest part of hunting big deer, for the most part, is actually not hunting them until everything lines up. Most guys, including myself in the beginning, hey, it's deer season, I need to be deer hunting. But through trial and error, I've learned that you're actually going to be better off and you're going to be successful more consistently when you find a big deer that you want to hunt. You do all your scouting, you figure out where you need to be to kill that deer, and you stay out of that area until everything lines up. And what I'm talking about, as far as things lining up, it's not just the moon. There's a handful of factors that are going to get deer active during daylight, especially your more mature deer that 9 times out of 10, they're going to lay there in their bed until dark, until they feel comfortable enough to get up and move during daylight. So, you know, partic- me in particular, over the last 20 or 30 years, I've learned that the most important thing is the wind. I want a wind that's going to be in that deer's favor. That was another light bulb moment for me.
Yeah.
Everybody, as long as I can remember, has been talking about how big deer live and die by the wind. So if that's the case, why wouldn't you give that buck the wind to his advantage so he's comfortable enough to get up and move during daylight? When I quit hunting winds good for me and started hunting winds that were good for the buck I was after, that changed the game for me. You
Yeah.
know, those deer they've learned it's not safe to move during daylight, and they just don't do it every day, or else
Mhm.
they would never survive. So if you can wait until you've got a wind that's good for that buck so he feels comfortable enough to get up and move before dark, and then you do that, or you go in on a night where you have the moon in your favor as well. And really, you were mentioning phase as far as that study goes. The moon guide doesn't really have anything to do with the phase of the moon. It's about the position of the moon in the sky and the gravitational pull. Because every day, as the moon rotates around the Earth, there's two times where it's actually closer than any other time of the day, and that's when it has the most gravitational pull. That's your overhead and underfoot moon. Key to the moon guide is you've only got a handful of days each month where that peak moon, whether it's overhead or underfoot, hits right at prime time when deer want to move anyway.
Yeah.
That big deer's laying in his bed. Everything's telling him to stay put, until dark when it's safe. But all of a sudden, he's got that wind in his favor. So he feels comfortable enough to move before it's dark. And then you've got that extra instinctive push to get him up and move just a little bit earlier and feed from that gravitational pull of the moon. And they can sense it just like they can sense, barometric pressure,
Right.
storms coming in.
Mhm.
So those are really the two key things that I'm looking for when I hunt. Is I want that perfect wind on a red good moon or a good red moon, and then if I can get a weather pattern that's going to increase deer activity for the evening, that to me is the perfect storm.
Right.
But I'm not. I'm probably going to step on a lot of toes here. I'm not going to pay as much attention to the weather as I do the moon. Now, given there's going to be nights when the weather trumps everything.
Mhm.
Those cold fronts, when you get a big temperature drop, when it goes from 75 degrees to, 55 or 65, when you have a big drop in temperature, especially, um, I don't care what the moon's doing, you need to be out at those times. But
Right.
I've killed and seen too many big mature bucks moving on nights where I had a good wind and a good moon, but the weather was, way too warm for me to be up moving. Killed my biggest buck ever on a night when it was, 85 degrees out, 2 hours before dark, first week in November in Kansas. There was no reason for that deer to be up moving that early when it was that high out.
Mhm.
So I've seen it. And like I said, the wind first, the moon, and then the weather is like the icing on the cake for me. But there are going to be, like I said, instances where the weather is going to trump the moon. But the more factors that you can line up on a given night in your favor, the better off you're going to be. And if you can stay out of your kill spots until those things line up, and let everybody else pressure the deer, push the deer, you know, you're 9 times out of 10, if you can wait until that stuff lines up before you dive in and kill them, you're going to get you're going to have more success. If I think back of, I've killed 14 or 15 deer over 170 now with my bow. Most of those deer were killed the first time I went in. I think everybody would agree that's listening. The first time you go into a spot is your best time, best chance to kill a big deer. Because each time you go into that area and you don't get it done, it's going to get tougher and tougher because he's going to start picking up on your scent that you leave behind. Maybe catch a glimpse of you going out after dark, with a light, or hear you or something. I mean, they're going to end up picking up on something. So the more times you go in, like I said, and don't kill him, the tougher it gets. So you've got to be patient enough to stay out of those kill spots until everything lines up. And like I said, most of the time, if you've got the discipline to stay out until you line up multiple factors that are going to get those deer active during daylight, chances are increased tenfold that you can kill them the first night that you go in.
Yeah. No, I love that, man. And I really preach that a lot on here about like building your Rolodex of reasons why you need to be there, and like really saving for that optimal time to, put in that strike and go in there and, surgically remove that deer. Can you, kind of explain a little bit about how you go about finding your kill spots? Like, break down, like, so, let's say we find this 170, 180 class deer, right? How are you going about picking your ideal location? I mean, are you solely mobile all the time and you're just going to scout your way in? And then it sounds to me a little bit like a lot of these locations, maybe like they're a preemptive attack. Like you've already got your tree picked out ahead of time. Like, can you kind of paint a scenario for me, like how you go about doing that and giving that deer that wind? Because I think a lot of people struggle with how to do that properly. I think it comes with a lot of time, but
Yeah, it does. And it really makes a difference on when you find the deer. In a perfect world, if you locate a buck, a year before you're actually going to be able to hunt him, that's when your scouting really is really important. And the things I'm looking for, late, late, late winter, early time of the year, like right now, before it gets really green, is the best time to get in the woods, obviously, because you can see the sign a lot easier. And
yeah.
what I'm really looking for is I'm trying to get a big picture of where he beds, where he feeds, and how he gets, from A to B, because I'm going to focus on trying to kill that buck early season when he's on a real strict feeding pattern. They're very predictable, very patternable. And to find a buck's core area, where he's bedding at is always the starting point. I mean, the food sources are, the easy part, to figure
Right.
out where he's going to be feeding at.
Right.
The bedding areas are a little trickier, but normally it's going to be some type of thick cover, whether it's a thicket, maybe a, ridge top, wherever. But the main thing I'm looking for are concentrations of big rubs,
Hmm.
because if you think about it, in October, early season, when you're going to try to kill this animal, what's that buck doing in October? He's not doing anything except bedding and feeding and making rubs. They're
Right.
they're obviously they're going to make some scrapes, but that's when they're doing the majority of their rubbing around their core area. They're not moving a whole lot. They're not going very far between bedding and feeding for the most part, in the Midwest. So those core areas are easier to find, and they're going to be marked with a lot, concentration of big rubs. So once you find, that area, or maybe even pick up his shed close to that area, you can kind of get a direction of travel where the food sources are. You start following the trails. You're going to see, sign on those trails, whether it's scrapes or big rubs, so you can get a direction of travel. But the bedding area, the core area, his safe zone is really what I'm looking for, because once you know where he's at and where he's coming from in the evenings, the game gets a lot easier as far as where you want to set up at,
Yeah.
to kill that
Mm.
deer. So that's really the main thing I look for, especially this time of the year on a particular deer that I know of, and I know I'm going to be hunting. I'm trying to
Right.
find his bedding area, his core area.
And leave him alone as much as possible until, you have all these factors that come into play where it's just right for you.
Yeah, it comes because I mean in October, early season, I don't do a lot of morning hunting. It's
Okay.
so tough to beat a big buck back into his bed, early
It's
season when he's on a strict feeding pattern.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me because I know you and Andre are really close. And like, what is your perception on like his tactics versus like yours? Because he's in there bumping a deer out of their bed, going in, shoving it down their throat in the morning a lot of times in early October, and like, as somebody like, it seems like you're a lot more methodical in what you're doing. Like, does it drive you nuts that he does that, or like how does that play out? Like, do you just do your thing because it's
I
worked
would,
for you? I
yeah, I
mean,
would never say I'm more methodical than Andre.
okay.
I've said it more than once. If I was a big deer, that is the last man in the world I would want coming after me with a stick and string.
Yeah.
And I've been in a tree above Andre running camera for him, 20 years ago. sliding into bedding areas in the morning. And, he prefers morning hunts. He's got a completely different approach than I do. And it's kind of funny, the, the, the really successful guys that I've met in the industry over the last 20 or 30 years, they all have developed a system that works for them, and they're consistent with it, and they kill big deer using it. And it never ceases to amaze me how different my strategy can be from other guys, whether it's
Yeah.
Andre, whether it's Bobby Worthington, um, the Wenzel brothers. I mean, I know them all, talked to them all, and picked their brains, and it never ceases to amaze me how different those systems can be. But different parts of the country, guys develop different strategies. And you know I've got nothing against Andre's tactics or anybody else's tactics. I just know what works for me.
Right.
And my tactic has always been trying to locate that buck, give him his bedding area, and use it as a last resort. I'll try to kill a big deer multiple times in the evening before I'll ever try to kill him in his bedroom.
Yeah.
If I'm going to
And
try to kill, what's
I'm
that?
on your side with that. I'm
Yeah.
sorry to cut you off. I said I'm on your side with that. That's kind of my approach as well.
Yeah, like I said, it's so difficult to beat a big deer back into his bed early in the season. I use it more as a last resort. If I haven't been able to kill him in the evenings, but I know where he's bedding, and hopefully I will try to hang stands right on those bedding areas as the last resort. Because if I have to do that, I want that stand pre-hung, and if at all possible, because early season, I've seen where these big bucks move, 100, 200 yards max sometimes. So, and that's one of the reasons why I think a lot of guys struggle early season, especially in the October lull, is these big deer are doing the exact same thing every day, which makes them very vulnerable, but they're doing it in this tiny little area.
Hmm.
And you can't hardly get into that spot without tipping that buck off to what's going on. So you
Yeah.
normally got one crack. And if you can have that stand pre-hung in that bedding area, you're way ahead of the game. And like I said, if I'm going to try a morning hunt, I want that stand pre-hung as early as possible. I would got to make sure that I can come in, the back door, and not take any chances on spooking that deer or any other deer trying to get in there before daylight. And then I'll do it on a morning where I've got a late morning moon time. So what I mean by that is, if it's daylight at 7 o'clock in the morning, I want that overhead or underfoot moon to peak anywhere from 7:30, 8 o'clock till maybe 10:30. I've witnessed firsthand on numerous occasions those big deer early season. Those are about the only mornings that you'll catch those big deer coming back to bed just a little bit later,
Okay.
because they're feeding a little bit later,
Right.
mid morning, early morning. And yeah, that's what I'm looking for. Like I said, pre-hung stand entrance is super important. Being able to get in and out without being detected, and then waiting for
Yeah.
a late morning moon.
Yeah. How much, emphasis do you put in scrapes? I mean, do you really try to use scrapes to your advantage, like right on the edges of these bedding areas to, give you an advantage for shooting them? I mean, how often does that play into your strategy? Is that one of the big things you like to use or what?
Uh, I wouldn't say early,
Okay.
unless I happen to find a scrape that's right next to or close to his bedding area.
Hmm.
Um, I rely a lot on my mineral sites close to bedding areas. That way I've had had great success monitoring big deer through over the years by having a mineral site set up, pretty close to a bedding area, because they'll use them obviously in the spring and summer. Um, and then once it gets close to season, it's almost like they'll abandon those mineral sites, maybe move to a summer feeding range. But when a lot of guys lose those bucks that they've been watching in the bean fields all summer, like clockwork every night
Yeah.
coming out to feed, as soon as they shed their velvet, they disappear. So what happened? Where did that buck go? Normally, that buck has relocated back to his core area, and when he does, those mineral sites are going to be one of the first things he checks. So,
Okay.
so that's why I set those up, around the
Yeah.
bedding areas.
Yeah, we have our mutual friend Sean Twitt, and I actually learned that from him a couple years ago. And I started doing that more here in Kentucky, is starting to put a mineral site near some of these bedding areas. And you're absolutely right; it definitely seems like they get way more traction, and you can really get that deer hitting them midday or right when he gets up out of bed to take a little break. I feel like it's just a nice little salty snack or something, if you want to call it that.
Hmm.
But it's so you do put a lot of, I know you live in Ohio. You so I mean, for velvet and stuff like that, you're keeping track of these deer. Have you kind of like already established where they're going to shift to when they go from, like, when they peel out of velvet? Have you already got that kind of figured out in your head a lot of times?
Yeah, because like I said, normally they're going to relocate back to their core area where where they're safe, where they feel they're safe, and where they've, left all that sign that I've found, in January, February, March, all those big rubs around their core areas, their bedding areas. That's normally where they're going to relocate to. There's a chance that they could relocate um, for food as well. Obviously, acorns are going to start dropping that time of the year, and that's a strong pull, but
Right.
9 times out of 10, those core areas back in the woods are going to be located, close to those, acorns that are dropping. But I've seen deer that will spend, the summer in the standing cornfields. And then as the cornfields start coming down, they kind of migrate, to the remaining standing cornfields. I've seen them relocate to soybean fields that are still green, in
Hmm.
October. So, I mean, there's a lot of different things that can be going on in October. Um, but you got to know, when it comes down to that deer feeling the pressure and he wants to get back to his safe area, back to his core area, you really need to know where that's at.
Yeah. Do you do anything to manipulate some of these core areas? Like, will you go and almost do like hinge cuts or anything like that to kind of set up a better bedding area for some of your private farms?
I haven't really because I don't. I have my own farm right now, finally, but it's just a small farm, and I really don't own, the bedding areas. It's more,
Okay.
the food sources and the food plots, and then the places that I've hunted over the years out of state. I really haven't done much, in the woods because, like I said, I don't own, the
Okay.
property, so I've not really manipulated the timber other than, access as far as trails go. Keeping trails mowed or old logging roads cleared for access. But yeah, as far as going in and hinge cutting, not to say I don't believe in that stuff, I just haven't had
Okay.
an opportunity where I could go to that extreme on the management end of it.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about, out of state trips. I feel like that's really one of the huge benefits for having the Moon Guide, is kind of optimizing your time out of state. What's one of your favorite times? Are you more of an October hunter versus a November kind of guy? I mean, it sounds to me, not knowing you that well, but, from following you over the years, I mean, I feel like you kind of have a lot of history with some of these deer that you're targeting. I mean, do you time it around there, like just before the rut kicks off, to really get after them, or what's your favorite time?
I'd have to say my favorite time to go after a specific buck is going to be early and late. And
Okay.
early meaning obviously opener until last week of October, first week of November, and then late season, after the rut when they're back on a strict feeding pattern. I actually struggled, hunting November for a long time, trying to figure out, are they locked down? Are they chasing? Are they seeking? Are they, what are they doing in November? And it seems like it changes every year, not that drastically, but there is a big change. And I didn't actually start having a lot of luck in November on really big deer until I kind of threw all that stuff out the window and really just kind of focused on um, the science behind the Moon Guide because in November, you want to be in the woods, obviously, when deer are active, the most active, even the
Mhm.
does. I mean, because if the does are active, the bucks are going to be active. And when does that happen? When are the deer most active every day? It's on that overhead and underfoot moon. I
Yeah.
mean, I can't tell you how many people I've talked to that they're like driving down the road in the middle of the day and there's deer out everywhere. And they're like, what's going on? Why are all the deer out everywhere? And you look at the moon guide and it's an overhead moon middle of the day.
Yeah.
So I really just I threw out everything that I'd ever learned about the rut as far as trying to figure out what phase it was, and have just focused on daylight activity and making sure that I was in the woods, when that overhead or underfoot moon peaked, whether it was in the morning, the evening, or midday. You know,
Yeah. I got you.
to be honest, I've had my best luck in November on morning hunts when that moon, like I said, when I wait for an overhead or underfoot moon to peak just after daylight,
Hmm.
those have been my best mornings. I think I shot three Boone and Crockett deer in Kansas in 4 years, anywhere from mm, 9 o'clock till 11:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
It just seems like in November when those bucks are cruising and following those does or looking for that first doe coming into heat, those mornings when you get a moon peaking anywhere from sunrise till maybe even lunch, that's when I've had my best luck. So I really try to focus my rut hunting in November on spots where I might not have a specific deer that I'm after, because you
Hmm.
never know what they're going to be doing in November.
Right. Right.
You
And
know
there's
what I
giants everywhere
Yeah,
around
when I'm
Kansas.
just
So
trying to focus on my best chance for activity, breeding activity in November, I'm focusing on the moon and I'm focusing on those peak activity times each day. And like I said, the best days for me is when you get a morning moon time. And actually, on the app, if you scroll through the app, there's going to be days when we have a star next to the morning and evening hunts.
yeah,
So
I've seen
those,
that.
yeah, those morning hunts that I'm talking about, where that moon peaks in the morning, it's going to have a star right next to it, and that will always follow the red moon. So you're going to have a 4 or 5 day window of opportunity when the evenings are really good, when that moon's peaking right before sunset. All the deer are going to be up in the evening, moving a little bit earlier, and then right after that, it kind of flips to morning, so
Yeah.
your best morning hunts are always going to be right after that red moon. So that's really what I'll focus on in November if I'm scheduling a hunt somewhere, is I want to get there and catch that window where they're moving really good in the evenings for 4 or 5 days, and then it flips over to the morning. So I've got really good evening hunts, flips over to the morning after that, and then I focus on morning hunts. And on those days when it hunts, or when the moon's peaking in the morning, I'm not as focused on my evening hunts. I might go in, before daylight and sit till, 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and then,
Hmm.
get down or change locations, because when that moon's peaking in the morning or the middle of the day, you've got to be back in the timber close to the bedding areas, obviously, to capitalize on that movement. But then in the evenings, you got to be out on the food sources. So that's a great way to approach hunting all day. I know it's really tough to sit in the stand all day. Sorry, my phone keeps slipping.
You're good.
But if you can't, if you're not the kind of guy that can sit all day long, set from, daylight until 1 or 2 in the afternoon to catch that movement period back in the timber, and then get down and switch to a stand on the edge of the field. So
Yeah.
can break it up
Yeah.
pretty quick.
I had an encounter a couple years ago with a buck that I ended up killing later on, probably a few weeks later. But man, I wanted to hunt all day this time, and it was like the same scenario you're talking about. We got a great midday movement forecasted, and I was like just going to hunt all day long, And it ended up being opening day of rifle season as well. But I'm bow hunting down in this big drainage, and man, like I got soaking wet that morning. It snowed, and then it was just cold, damp, and I couldn't take it anymore. So I got out, got all my clothes dry, got back in the stand at like 12:30. I think the peak time was even came up at like between like 12:30 and 1 o'clock, right? So I was like, oh man, perfect timing. Adam, as I'm climbing up, this buck comes barreling down, and it could have just been, chance or circumstance, but
Sure.
it was just ironic to me. And I couldn't help but look at the moon god there and just like kind of chuckle. I'm like, damn it, man. Like you should have just, held off on the early morning hunt and just slipped in here at like 8 or 9 and hunted the whole day. And it was a layup shot, man. He was like 15 yards right there, right where I wanted him to be at. But
Yeah.
such is life.
It's it's not 100%, when it comes to the moon. And I don't think really anything is,
Yeah.
but sometimes it can be scary how accurate that thing can be. It really
Yeah.
can be. I'm not going to sit at home, if the moon's not right. I
Right.
sit a
Right.
lot of observation stands, or I might scout, a new farm or for a different deer. When the moon's not right, I'm definitely not going to be sitting at home on the couch because the moon's not good. But I guarantee you, on those nights when it is lined up, I'm going to be in my kill spots because, killing big deer is all about trying to predict what he's going to do before he ever does it. And 9 times out of 10, he's going to make a move and make a mistake on those nights when, the moon and the wind have lined up. So,
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to trying to plan and get in there, because once he shows up on camera, he's already been there. You missed your
Right.
opportunity. So when's he going to show up? And man, I'm telling you, after 30 years of chasing big deer, most of the time when that moon and that wind lines up, that's when you're going to catch him making a mistake.
Yeah. And, to kind of circle back and touch on that with the whole wind stuff, so you're basically flirting with disaster, right? Like to kind of paint a scenario for some of our listeners, you're giving him the wind. So he's going to come down a trail and he'll have the wind in his advantage. And at the last second, you're going to dump him before he catches your wind. Is that correct?
Yeah, pretty similar or close to that. Back in the day, I read an article that Alan Foster had wrote, and it was called "Hunting the Buck's Weak Spot,"
Mm-hmm.
and it's all about finding that spot where you can get within bow range of him while he's using the wind to his advantage. And
Right.
a lot of guys give me that deer in the headlight look when I tell them that. But really, like I said, how I explained it before, you got to give him the wind for him to be able to feel comfortable enough to move during daylight. But how do you find a spot along his travel pattern where you can get within bow range of him while he's got the wind in his favor?
Right.
Those aren't the easiest spots to find.
Yeah.
You
It
know,
comes with time too. I know I've done it a couple times on purpose, and then there's other times I've done it and not realized until after I killed him that that was what happened.
hmm
Um,
when you find
but,
yourself in that spot where you're splitting hairs on the wind,
mhm,
where if it shifts, 10 to 20 degrees one way or the other, it could be the difference, in success and failure. And there's been situations where I've set up in a spot to where my wind is blowing right at that trail. And I mean, as soon as he gets right there, if I don't have an arrow in him already, he's going to catch my wind,
right,
you
right.
know?
What is your like ideal wind, mile per hour that you like to hunt? I know around here in Kentucky, man, it can just be a son of a bitch a lot of times. Like this, especially this past year, I had more swirling winds than I've ever had in my life. I feel like I got blown at way too much last year,
hmm
and it, it was kind of almost out of my control. Like there was just times where I'd have a great wind the whole evening, and then my buck steps out, and here goes the wind blowing right at him. So
Yeah.
what's your ideal wind?
It's almost like somewhere in that, 8 to 12, where
Yeah.
it's a nice steady breeze.
Hmm.
It's not windy, it's not calm. You just got a nice steady breeze moving your scent in a specific direction.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I like the best.
I feel like I've noticed the deer move even more during those kind of days like that too. It's almost like they feel a little bit safer. Like they can get away with more versus like a really calm day with no wind. It's like they're just on pins and needles every time they're moving around.
Well, yeah, because if the wind's not moving, all they're really smelling is what's right there,
Yeah,
where they're at.
yeah. No, that's something that all you guys listening need to kind of think about when you're trying to set up on something. It's been a pretty fail-proof plan as far as I say that. I mean, let's talk about getting busted. I mean, you go in there. Are you bothered if a doe busts you because you're only hunting that buck? I mean, can you get into that a little bit with us? I mean, is it just it is what it is? Like you don't worry about it?
Well, I wouldn't say I don't worry about it. I try to do everything I can not to get busted, and it doesn't matter where I'm at or how secure I feel in my setup. Nothing deflates you quicker than having deer blow at you.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, so I do everything I can to keep that from happening. I'm a big believer in ozonics,
Hmm.
especially in my situations, because I'm putting myself at a disadvantage right out of the gate, by
Yeah.
hunting marginal wins. Um, I use a lot of cover scents as well. Use a lot of attractant scents. A lot of guys say, well, if you're using an ozonics, why are you using an attractant, or another kind of scent? Think of it this way, when you go to bed at night, you close all your windows and lock them, close your doors and lock them.
Yeah.
You do all that, and then at the end of the night before you go to bed, you turn your alarm system on. It's just multiple layers of protection, and that's what
Right.
I'm looking at. The more layers of protection I have, you know, to kill my scent, eliminate my scent, cover my scent, all that stuff. I'm doing. That's the most important part of the game. Is keeping a
Yeah.
deer from smelling you. So why would you trust everything to one product?
Right.
Or it's a system. It's never in hunting big deer, it's never one thing. It's always a system or multiple factors. So
Like
I
you
do
said
it
earlier, just stacking the odds in your
exactly.
favor. Yeah.
Stacking the deck in your favor.
How high do you like to hunt usually? I'm sure that's like an open-ended question, but I mean, do you hunt low or are you more of you like getting up higher?
And when I started out, I had a 30-foot pull rope for my bow, and I wouldn't hang my stand until that thing was tight, And
Yeah.
I can't remember the last time I hunted that high. I'm more concerned about the cover and the tree,
Yeah. Same.
than I am focused on the height anymore. I mean, and I got a lot going on in a tree, doing self filming. I got all my hunting gear, and trying to
Yeah.
kill a big deer is tough enough, let alone, running a camera and trying to film it yourself. And it's cost me some big deer over the years. But yeah, I'm more concerned really about having good cover in the tree. And, late season when there's no cover on the tree. Um, I do like to be a little bit higher, but I mean, man, I tell you what, the last few years with this Osseo,
Yeah.
and I was a big Sitka guy for a while, but I always felt like I was kind of glowing,
Hmm.
in
No,
the
I've
tree.
noticed the same thing, man. Even
Yeah.
in late season, like
This,
I've
yeah,
had
this stuff
deer.
just melts into the tree. It really
It
does.
does.
So it
Yeah.
helps obviously to have a good camo pattern, but yeah, late season, it's all about trying to find that little bit of cover left in the tree because it's so difficult to stay undetected. But
Do you bring cover with you every once in a while? I know that's one thing that has helped me in the past. Just bringing some cedar limbs sometimes with me and stuff like that to break me up in those trees that I have to be in that I can't, find any other cover to put me, break my outline up.
yeah, that definitely helps.
Yeah.
Yeah, I bought a bunch of that. You remember the old Camo Flex that Lone Wolf sold back in the day?
I
It's
don't
like
know.
it's like a it's I think it's got like a flexible, almost like a metal frame to it that's covered with plastic. It looks kind of like a twig and fake leaves on it. It's like they're like limbs, with leaves on them. And I've got a few stands that I really like to hunt late season that I've added some of that stuff to it, to
Okay.
give me a little break up, a little bit of cover.
Yeah. You touched on filming a little bit. I was really curious. What has been your favorite camera that you've used for self filming? What do you like? I mean, okay, so for me, I wanted to upgrade my video quality recently, and I had a mirrorless camera. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not a cameraman. I'm good at filming hunts, but I went from having a handy camera, like a Canon G20, to this mirrorless camera, and now I'm back to using the Canon. I got a G70 was what I upgraded to, and I don't know. I just don't care for the mirrorless cameras. I know a lot of guys get really good video footage out of them, but for someone that's just self filming, I thought that was just a nightmare for me.
Yeah, um, I'm with you. I've always used a video camera, and I bought a mirrorless camera a few years ago, and I used it maybe half the season last year. And really, the only reason I quit using it was because I didn't know the camera well enough.
Yeah.
Um, I've been to a couple of Tom Petrie's classes, the guy that runs Film the Hunt,
Hmm.
puts on some really good classes on field production, on, you know, understanding your cameras, how to use them, how to get the most of them. And I'm sold on the mirrorless camera. And I just actually 2 weeks ago took another class on it and figured out some of the stuff that I was missing and doing wrong. But I mean, the image quality is just it's like night and day, over
Yeah.
the video cameras. But for a guy that is just getting started, I would never suggest trying to film your own hunt with one of those mirrorless cameras, because it's not like you can hook a very zoom up to it and adjust everything with your thumb as far as zooming in and out and focus and all that stuff. So it's much more difficult. So you've got to know your product inside and out to be able to get away with it. But man, the quality of the imagery you get with those mirrorless cameras and the amount of light those things gather.
Yeah.
I've used some of the best video cameras that I could buy, and it seemed like you're always losing that last 15 or 20 minutes of daylight because the cameras just wouldn't gain enough light. And with these mirrorless cameras, with the right ones, I mean, you can film past the point of that you can actually see, what
Yeah.
you're shooting. So I
Hmm.
mean, they'll gain the light, they'll find it.
Yeah. Are you using a monitor on your mirrorless or no?
I'm not. I thought about switching to a monitor just to give me a little bit, bigger screen to look at.
Yeah, that was
But
my thing. I didn't care for, going back from a Canon to that. I was like,
yeah,
because you can't tell sometimes when it's like blurring in. And that was the other big complaint I had. I feel like that thing was always hunting for the focus. And I'm
yeah.
like, man,
If
I was
you've got
so
it set
panicked
on
about that.
if you've got it set on autofocus, and that was the main reason that I stopped using it this past year, because I had figured out how to use it and how the best way to focus with the tracking through the autofocus, and it gained enough light to film. But when you're on autofocus in low light situations, that camera struggles with the autofocus, so you've actually got to go to manual.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've completely got away from using the autofocus on it. If you use the oh, what's the word for it, where you get anything that's in focus on the camera has got the red lines on it.
Yeah. I know what you're talking about.
And
I
it's not.
call it like the zebra stripes that I have, but it lets you know
Yeah,
where your
I
focus
can't I
is.
can't think of
Or
that word, but yeah, it shows you right off the bat what's in focus and what isn't. So
yeah. Yeah, you've definitely got to be a cameraman to run one of those on your own. Like, I don't suggest any of you country boys out there that are just looking to get into filming to go that route. So
yeah,
go with the handy cam. I think that's the best way. And like you said, the very zoom makes it really simple. You could have your bow in your left hand, and your camera in your right, and get it
yeah.
done.
If I was going to suggest one thing though to guys that are self-filming, is to have some type of POV camera either mounted on your bow or mounted above you to catch, the action in case you can't get it with your main camera.
Okay.
I almost always run a GoPro or a Tacticam mounted on my bow.
Hmm.
So if nothing else, I can at least get the shot with that camera. or to have, like an action cam or 360 cam mounted above your shoulder to at least get everything in front of you.
Yeah.
If you miss it with the big camera, because it's
And it makes for an awesome angle if you do get it on camera and you have that for backup. I think it's
yeah,
great.
yeah,
This year was the first year I actually got my second angle footage of me shooting a buck, and I loved it, man. It turned out great.
yeah.
So looking forward to that coming out. But man, to shift gears, one of the biggest things I really wanted to ask you is, what's been one of your biggest takeaways on how you're able to find some of these giant bucks? I mean, what's some good advice for some of our guys out there? Like, are you finding these deer just through going around and glassing up all kinds of areas, and then you go in and knock on doors, or is it word of mouth, or how have you been able to find so many giant deer?
Yeah, for a long time that was my mainstay. It was doing a lot of scouting in the summer in the bean fields to find them, following up on every lead. Anybody that I heard talking about a big deer, shed hunting properties. And I've kind of really made a big switch though, because that's really the toughest part of the game anymore is going out and finding big deer and then actually being able to get access to hunt them, because everything's either leased up or whatever. It's the toughest part of the game anymore. So I've actually, you know in my older age, I've kind of gotten away from that. I've got my own farm now in Ohio. I've been hunting the same areas in Illinois and Kansas for close to 20 years now. I've got a good friend in Alberta that I hunt with. So I've kind of got away from going out and finding deer to hunt to, obviously I've learned the properties that I've been hunting, for the last 20 years pretty intimately, and do what I can, as far as management goes and letting the younger deer grow. And I get more out of it these days, hunting bucks that I've watched for the last 4 or 5 years, and letting
Right.
them grow and passing them up, than actually just, going out and driving the roads and knocking on the doors trying to find new spots. I guess I'm showing my age there, but I'm not into I'm not into it like I used to be as far as going out and finding those deer. I'm more about trying to grow them, trying to manage the farms that I hunt. I got great friends, that I really enjoy being with every year where I hunt at. And, I guess really I've just made a big switch from that. And I just don't really do that anymore like I used to.
Yeah, it's kind of changed for you. I guess you're not as much concerned with like chasing numbers. You're more into like building a relationship with the deer and kind of,
Yeah, because that's what it's really about for me is,
yeah.
knowing the deer, figuring him out, doing what I can on the properties to enhance it, and setting my traps and all that sort of thing. I mean, not to say if I'm driving down the freeway and see a giant, I'm not going to
Oh
do a
yeah,
little
no,
do a little
absolutely.
investigating, but that's just not my mainstay like it used to be.
Yeah. When you go to Canada, I was always curious about that. Like, is it an expensive hunt? Like, I mean, for some of our guys, it might, be on the north side of the country. I mean, what's involved with hunting Canada? I mean, is it an expensive tag for a
Yeah,
non-resident?
most of your whitetail hunts in good areas in Canada are going to be, north of $5,000.
Oh
So
wow.
I mean,
Okay.
yeah, it's not a cheap deal. I've hunted a lot in Saskatchewan and Alberta over the years, and I'll tell you, I think that's where the next world record is going to come from. And it's really different up there because the pressure is so minimal up there.
Yeah.
And it's most places in Canada, you're not going to go and see a bunch of deer, but the chances of when you do see one, it could be, the biggest deer of your life.
Why
I've
do you
met
think that is? Is it the soil or the genetics or?
a combination of everything: the
Yeah.
soil, the genetics, the food, the lack of pressure, all of it combined.
Yeah. Lower density. So they get a lot more protein, I guess. And they got to be big to survive the winters there, I imagine. So, I mean, not only do
And
you have big deer,
it's a bigger animal,
right?
it's a different subspecies of whitetail deer. I mean, they're the biggest whitetails in North America up in Canada, so it's just a
Yeah.
bigger animal.
I'll tell you one thing that really sticks out to me now that I'm talking to you is, man, that one in velvet that did you miss him? I think you know which deer I'm talking about. It was an absolute, I mean, like world class whitetail. I believe it was all in velvet, wasn't it? It was like double drop tines.
Oh yeah, no, he wasn't in velvet. That was in
No, okay.
November. Yeah,
Hardhorn, okay.
that was my first trip to the Edmonton Bow Zone, and that's the probably the biggest deer I'll ever see in my life.
Yeah, that thing was unbelievable. Did he end up getting killed by anybody or?
Don't really know.
Yeah,
The outfitter, after I hit that deer, we flew. The outfitter's brother actually was a pilot, and he had a couple small planes, and we flew for 2 days trying to find that deer. I'd hit him in no man's land right below the spine,
yeah,
and couldn't find anything on that deer. The outfitter told me the next year that the farmer thought that he'd seen him, and I went back and hunted him again, but don't know if that deer made it. He probably crawled in the bush somewhere and died, never to be seen again. I'd always hoped that somebody was going to come out of the woodwork with, the skull or the antlers off that thing that they had found 20 years ago. I mean, hard to say the kind of money I would give for that, but I mean, that was the sheds from that deer the year before were mid 220s, and he had grown, I want to say 15 or 20 inches. I mean,
yeah. I was gonna
I,
say he looked like a 240 or 250 inch deer or something.
yeah, I
If I
mean,
had to guess.
a, a typical 6x6, 200-inch typical frame. And then he had, brow tines that were like 12 inches. They were both split. He had stickers everywhere. He had matching drops. I mean, yeah, I can't tell you how many times I've watched that footage again and just, try to put a score to that deer. And I always come up with 230, 235,
Yeah,
240
yeah.
range. I mean, just biggest
I'm
deer
sorry to
call I've
rub it
ever
in.
seen.
Sorry to bring back bad times, but as a young guy, I remember watching that footage and just being in awe, man. I mean, that was unbelievable deer. I think it's some of the most like beautiful country too to hunt whitetails in. I mean,
It is.
I wish I could. I really want to do that one of these days. I want to plan a trip up there to hunt.
Yeah.
But
And I'm really hooked on bear hunting up there too. I mean,
yeah,
when you start chasing those really big bear up there, it's like hunting a big whitetail.
okay,
I'm kind of on standby with my outfitter right now for when these bears start coming out of their dens, and when they get on a bait. You got about a 2 week window once they come out of their den to catch them on a bait, and then they're going to be off, traveling the country looking for, that first sow to come into heat. But it's very similar to hunting big whitetails. I've had the bear bug for a long time, and up there it's completely different because most of the places that you bear hunt, the bears, if they know you're there, they're not going to come in. They're going to take off if they see or smell you. They
yeah,
still think they're at the top of the food chain up there.
they don't care about you, huh?
They're not scared of you.
Oh man,
So it can sometimes it can almost feel, I don't want to say, that they're tame, um, or like in a zoo because they're not scared of you and they're not running. But I mean, if you can just imagine, you walk into a bar and there's 8 or 10 guys in there that can kick your ass. you know, I
yeah,
mean, it's being that close to an animal that's not scared of you that
yeah.
can just,
It's addicting, isn't it?
it's addicting, and
Yeah,
it can be a little, I don't want to say scary, but I mean, yeah, you got to be on your A game, be on your toes, because
absolutely.
those bears get close and they're not afraid of you. And I've been in some situations that I don't care to think about too often.
Yeah. No, I can imagine, man. I've never done a bear hunt. I've tried. I grew up in Maryland, and we had a draw system for bear tags in Western Maryland, and I drew, but never got to take one. And if I'm going to be honest, for me with the money situation, I always wanted to do an elk hunt, and I did that a couple years ago, and I was really fortunate. But now I'm kind of planning my next thing that I want to do bucket list is a mule deer. I've always wanted to kill a big mule deer.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to do that.
Yeah. They say a 200-inch mule deer is one of the toughest animals to kill.
Really? That's interesting.
Yeah.
I've never heard that. You
Or
know,
I should say toughest animal to find,
to find. Okay.
Yeah.
I was curious, if you had to pick one state, I guess obviously Iowa or Kansas would kind of pop up in mind, but for one of the most accessible states, maybe over the counter, where would you say for some of our listeners their highest probability to kill a Boone and Crockett, like over the counter right now?
Over the counter, probably Indiana. I
Indiana?
think, yeah, I think I just read something here not too long ago that in the last 5 years, there's been more Boone and Crockett deer registered in Indiana than any other state.
Yeah, I can vouch for that. I got to hunt Indiana last year and, well, really 2 years ago now, but, man, it was phenomenal. I was blown away. We were there. I was bow hunting. It was opening day of rifle, and the amount of 200-inch deer that were killed while I was there, I was mind blown by. And I guess it's just like Illinois. It's really no different. I mean, the way a crow flies where we were, Illinois is right there. So you got the same soil and the same genetics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they've really changed up the regulations in the last 10 years in Indiana to give deer a chance to grow and reach their potential, and that's about as good as it gets anymore. I think
Yeah.
Indiana, Kentucky, Ohio, they're all great choices that are still
Yeah.
over the counter.
Yeah. Kentucky's really difficult, man. Even being a resident here, like I've noticed it's a really pockety kind of area. Like, everybody thinks like I've lived here, and I moved here and we picked our county on the map as like a concentration of Boone and Crockett entries. And I can tell you, like, yeah, we had a 240-inch deer that I was able to chase, which was great. And I'm not trying to act like there's not big deer around, but I mean, other than that, I've never had a 170-inch deer on camera. And I do a ton of scouting and I do a ton of glassing and everything. It's one of those states, man. I think you got to be in the right place at the right time in the right area. I mean, it's all circumstantial, but another thing I wanted to ask you was kind of, when you do find a giant buck, like what is your process like? Or do you go straight to the map? Like, do you e-scout more, or are you more boots on the ground kind of guy?
I don't think there's any replacing boots on the ground. I mean, obviously, it's great to have an aerial view that's going to show you a lot of obvious things, your pinch points and funnels and fence lines and all that stuff. But I don't think there's any way to replace boots on the ground. And I think, I think the actual scouting aspect of hunting is getting to be a kind of a lost art because it's almost like guys think they can do it all on their phone,
Yeah.
which you can do more now than you ever could before. But
Right.
yeah, for me, actually getting on the ground and especially this time of the year and combing through the woods before everything greens up is just
Yeah.
irreplaceable.
Do you like to kick deer up, or are you against that?
It doesn't matter to me right now.
No,
Just
not
not
right
really.
now. I'm more referring to like in season. Like, let's say you saw a giant, in October out in the field, and you went in there and scouted. Like, would you purposefully go kick that deer out of his bed?
Um, Not unless I was trying to locate him. If I couldn't find him,
Yeah.
you only got so much time early season to get it done, and you don't want to waste time in the wrong spot. And if you don't know where that deer's at, yeah, you can start pounding the brush until you find him, and bump him up. That's a great way to know where he's at. And Andres made a career out of killing big deer with that tactic. So
Yeah.
I don't like to, but there are certain circumstances where you might have to do it, or it could help, to relocate a buck.
Yeah. Do you tend to do more glassing than I mean, I guess it's all, scenario based if you're hunting hardwoods or versus that, but in your experience and all the bigger deer that you've killed over the years, have you spent more time behind the glass before you go in for your strike, or
Yeah,
is
yeah,
that the case?
yeah. I do a lot of summer scouting from observation stands, 300 yards away from a particular spot, so I know I'm not affecting the deer, and grab my binoculars and a spotting scope and mount it in a tree and then just watch, from a safe distance. I've
Yeah.
done that a lot in the summertime.
Yeah. What did trail cameras do for you when you first started using like trail cameras? Did they kind of help you, or do you feel like they kind of educated the deer more?
I'm not so sure that there's been a product in the industry that's helped me kill more big deer than the trail camera.
Okay.
Other than the Moon Guide.
Yeah.
But yeah, trail cameras. Yeah, that's been a game changer,
Yeah.
absolute game changer, especially for me. Because I'm hunting, 4 or 5 states every year, and there's just no way you can, you know, gather that kind of intel without them.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I've kind of been on the fence. I mean, like this year especially, man, I noticed a lot of deer really kind of like skirting some of these cell cams, and I couldn't help but think to myself, like they're putting off some kind of signal that the deer are kind of picking up on. Like, have you noticed that with the transition from regular cameras to cell cams?
I've heard it, I've seen it, I've heard guys talk about it. Excuse me.
I mean, some deer it doesn't bother, but there's others that I'll get one picture of them and that's it, and I won't see them again. And
I got some guys on my team that have been having really good success with mounting their cameras up higher in the tree, out
okay,
of a deer's, line of sight, and had really good luck with that. And probably going to be doing a lot more of that myself.
okay,
Yeah, because I've seen it happen. I was just watching a video clip the other day, and of one of the bucks, one of our guys shot, and it actually, he's on a field edge. He's got a cellular camera on the other side of the field, and that buck coming down the opposite field edge actually skirted that camera and brought that buck closer into bow range because he was looping around the camera.
yeah, that's
Just
wild.
crazy.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I've visually watched him skirt some of my cameras, and it's like, all right, well, what the hell am I doing with this thing?
Hmm.
Like I've kind of like started thinking about that. I'm like, well, maybe I need to put these in more of a like an observation area, like overlooking a field edge or a scrape, or like maybe not right on it. So I, I'm glad. That's one thing I was really interested to ask you.
I really like to have a camera set up close to my stand, on a trail, so that when a deer comes through there, I know he's coming through within bow range.
Yeah.
That's a big tactic of mine, to have a camera close to the stand so that, you know, and there's always a chance where it could skirt it and go a different route, other side of the camera, back side of the camera. But yeah, I really like to have a camera set up close to my stand so I know when they're coming through there.
I got you. Man, I would love to hear maybe one of your favorite, buck stories that you've had from over the years. What's one that really stands out to you?
Mm, well, the one that stands out to me the most isn't necessarily my favorite one. The one that you brought up, earlier about that giant that I hit up in the bow zone.
Yeah.
I mean that probably actually drives me the most, because it was a deer I didn't kill and the biggest buck I'd ever seen. And you know, I keep hoping that one of these days I'm going to come across something that's comparable to that deer, or bigger, and get another chance. But that hunt really had it all. It was so memorable. Going up to an area like the Edmonton Bow Zone that I'd never been to before, and just seeing new country. And like you said, it's some of the prettiest whitetail country you'll ever see. And then just everything that happened on that hunt. I mean, I can go over it really quick. Um, I got into camp and hunted the first morning. Heard a deer come into the woods, didn't see it. Outfitter was taking me to a different farm that afternoon, and when we pulled up, he's like, "Yeah, you're probably not going to want to sit here." They were semi after semi after semi hauling manure into this farm and spread manure, and I mean, it stunk to high heaven. And I said, "No, I think I do want to hunt here because there ain't a deer around that's going to be able to smell me, with
Yeah.
all the manure being spread."
Uh-huh.
And the spot, he drove me right to the stand, and in the bow zone, obviously there's no gun hunting. Um, Drove me right to the base of the tree. Didn't want anybody walking around, and it was right at the end of a lake. And the deer were coming out of this big thicket on the other side of the lake and looping around looping around the lake and coming by this stand. And I saw, I don't know, 5 or 6 does and 2 or 3 small bucks that first night. And it just seemed like a perfect, spot for a November hunt.
Hmm.
So I left everything in the tree, and I normally do that anyway. I like to set everything up for an evening hunt, leave everything in the tree so I can slip back in the morning, not have to set anything up. I'm ready to go.
Yeah.
So he took me in there 2 hours before daylight. The following morning, drove me right to the tree. Was coming back to pick me up at 10:30, and all morning I was in there for 2 hours. I could hear this buck chasing a doe around, just grunting and making all kinds of racket. And I was just, I'd have given anything to have it been daylight, an hour earlier. But finally cracks daylight. I see this doe come up over this little ridge in front of me, walks down right in front of me at 30 yards on the trail and plops down, lays down right in front of me. I'm like, I am in the chips.
Yeah.
And this buck comes up over the hill. He gets right up on top of the hill. And I mean, it's the most majestic, memorable thing I've ever seen. That giant rack, just he's just standing in the poplars, just looking. And I'll never forget it if I live to be 100 what that deer looked like. But he comes down off the hill. He sees that doe bedding there, and he gets to, I believe it was like 45 yards, and there's a big deadfall right there. And he was on this side of it, and he was kind of browsing, and I'm just waiting for my shot. And all of a sudden, he just pops down, and he lays down right there. And okay, I'm in the money. As soon as he gets up, he's gonna come to this doe. She's right on the trail, right at 30 yards,
Yeah.
and it's gonna be a chip shot. 2 hours, 3 hours later, it's like 10 o'clock, and that buck's still laying there, hasn't moved. And I'm thinking to myself, I got 30 minutes before the outfitter drives to the base of my tree to pick me up. And I
Yeah.
got no phone, no cell phone
Right.
calling.
Right. Oh man. Oh God.
Didn't know what to do. So I ended up pulling my grunt call out, and I had to be pretty careful because that doe's at 30 yards laying facing me. So I get the grunt call out, and I make some grunt calls back behind me. He never even acknowledges that he hears the call, nothing.
Hmm.
Didn't acknowledge it at all. I wait 10 minutes and like, man, what am I going to do? Well, unbeknownst to me, I had called in a smaller buck. He'd heard the grunt and came in, and he walked between me and those deer. He never saw either of them laying there. Walks over to my left, and he's just, 30 or 40 yards browsing, feeding. And that was all it took. That big one was not having that little
Yeah.
deer in the area. And
Yeah.
he gets up and he starts coming. And, for the last 3 hours, I'm sitting there thinking to myself, all he's got to do is get up. That doe's at 30 yards. I'm going to put my 20-yard pin right at the top of his lungs and let him have it. He gets up and he starts cutting straight towards that deer. And he gets right into my shooting lane on a grunt. Nothing. Grunt again. Nothing. A little louder again. I grunted 3 times. Never acknowledged me. I finally went, hey, to stop him, and he stopped, and I put my 20-yard pin right on the top of his lungs, and that's right where I hit. And I didn't realize it at the time. I'd been thinking 30 yards, but when he got up, he had cut some distance, and he was probably actually right at 20 yards when I
Oh
shot,
no.
and
Yeah.
I hit right where I was aiming. And he took off 20 or 30 yards, stopped. The doe went the other way. He ended up turning, going that way, and oh,
You were ready to jump out of the tree.
I didn't know whether to throw up or
Oh man.
jump out of the tree head first. But
Oh, my
yeah,
heart breaks for you. For honestly, that's as it really was. It was honestly some of the most beautiful whitetail footage I think I've ever seen. Like, so I'm sorry you didn't get him, but I'm so glad that you were able to film that. And at least you have that memory of him. I mean,
yeah. Anytime I need a good cry, I just turn
yeah.
that footage on and watch it.
Oh man. Well, buddy, it's been a pleasure having you on here, man. I've really enjoyed this time with you. And thank you.
Absolutely.
If
Appreciate the invite.
Yeah, absolutely. Guys, tune in to Team 200 and follow along on Adam's season and all the other guys there, and our good friend Sean Twitt as well. I think he's now a member with you. So
Yep.
Other than that, you can check up with Adam. Are you more on social media, or on Instagram or Facebook, or what do you?
Oh yeah, I've got a page on Instagram and Facebook, and then I've got pages for the Moon Guide as well too. And anybody's got any questions about the Moon Guide, they can always email me at info@moonguide.com. We got some pretty cool stuff this year for the Moon Guide. If anybody's out there that has never used the app before, we're going to have probably the best wind forecasting on your maps that I've ever seen before. And when I saw it the first time, I told my app developer that we had to figure out a way to incorporate it into the app, because there's nothing more important than the wind, other
Yeah,
than when those red moon nights are. And yeah, it's going to be the best wind forecasting you've ever seen on an app.
that's awesome, man. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
I'll definitely be hollering at you to get one. So,
Yeah.
all right, man. Well, thanks again, and we'll catch up with you in the future, I hope.
Oh yeah, we'll have to jump on here again, maybe towards season or during season here this next year,
Yeah,
next
absolutely,
season.
man. Yeah, thanks for this. I know we got turkey season coming in, and now I'm all hyped up about deer hunting. So, but hey, man, I hope you have a good spring, and good luck if you go and make it out there bear hunting.
Yep, we'll do, man. I'll let you know.
All right, brother. Have a good one.
You too. Thanks.